Okay, so before we start this week's parsha, I told Marty on Shabbos afternoon that the beginning of the parsha relates a lot with what we've been talking about. That the woman makes a neder, and if she's young, her father can annul it, or if she's married, her husband can annul it. So, I want to mention three opinions. There might be more, but as pshat in the pasuk, when we talk about a nader la'anos nafesh, to afflict the soul. So we saw that it had to do with stuff that would affect them intimately, or just them together. La'anos nafesh. So she made some type of thing that they wouldn't be able to have relations together, or certain type of nedarim, like that. So what are some of the meforshim say as pshat in the pasuk? So Rashi says, because the pasuk says that the husband's allowed to annul or cancel out the vows, you might think, oh, every vow. So the pasuk says no, he can only annul things that la'anos nafesh. So only things that have to do with afflicting the soul, which the Gemara which are explained in Gemara Nedarim and Daf Ayin Tes. So the Sifsei Chachamim says, for example, I didn't look in the Gemara there, but the Sifsei Chachamim says if she's not going to eat a certain type of food, or she's not going to drink a certain type of drink, so that's something that he could get involved in. The Ibn Ezra, oh, this one has an extra word that I didn't see before. The Ibn Ezra seems to say that it has to do with fasting. Now there's a very good logic to that, and as shot in the pasuk, because on Yom Kippur, the pasuk talks about ta'anu es nafshosechem, afflict your souls. So the main thing is by fasting, but we know that there's 5 inuyim on Yom Kippur. But for the specific why they use the word afflict your soul, so the Ibn Ezra says it has to do with fasting. The Baal HaTurim mentioned something interesting. Baal HaTurim says because there's the word le'anos is here, and it's a pasuk in Tehillim Peches, and that's talking about musical instruments. So Baal HaTurim says that tells us that if she made a vow not to listen to instruments, the husband is allowed to cancel it, because the Gemara in Moed Katan says that this is that's something that's considered la'anos nafesh, to afflict her soul, and the husband can affect that. Either never listen to music, just I'm not going to listen to a harp, or they didn't have that many instruments in those days, but that's what the Baal HaTurim says. And I thought that I wrote something about term, but I'm not seeing it. But in the Rashba, but I'm not seeing that now. So the Baal HaTurim isn't coming to exclude the other things, but he's saying that even if she says not to listen to music, that would be included. And he brings a proof for from the use of the la'anos in Tehillim, and then from a Gemara. So just as pshat in the pasuk, Rashi obviously brings the most, what Chazal say, and Ibn Ezra and Baal HaTurim mentioned some other things. So because that's this week's parsha, and that's what we've been talking about, I just wanted to mention those opinions. So we're in Ayin Dalet Amud Beis. So we'll reread a few lines. It's not a bad thing. So on 74b1, the second paragraph, it's on the first line in Ayin Dalet Amud Beis in the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Brayso, Halcha Eitzel Chacha V'Tirua. So let's say that when he was Mekadesh, she had a vow, he didn't know about it, but then she went to a Chacham, and the Chacham was able to do Hataras Nedarim. He was able to find a way to annul her vow. Mekudesha, then the Kedushin does take place, because the Tanai got fulfilled. The condition got fulfilled. It's a rofe v'riposa ain't of Kedushes. But if she had some type of mum, some type of blemish. They didn't know about it. She went to the doctor and got healed. Even though now she doesn't have a blemish, she's not Mekudeshes. So the Brisa says, Ma ben Chacham l'Rofe. What's the difference between a Chacham that when he cancels the vow, it's considered that the Tanai, the condition of the Kedushin, is fulfilled, but by the doctor, even though she doesn't have a blemish anymore, the condition of the Kedushin is not fulfilled and she's not Mekudeshes. So the Gemara says, so the Brisa says, Chacham Oker said Neder Meikara. The Chacham, when the Chacham is Mater Neder, it's retroactively annulled as if she never made the Neder in the first place. So therefore, after he was Mater Neder, it ends up that when the husband made made the Kedushin with her, the Tanai was already fulfilled at that time because she's considered to have not had any vows at that time. But the doctor only heals from now and into the future. But at the point of Kedushin, she had the mum, so it wasn't Mekudeshes. Now, just I want to point out, there are some conditions that a person could make that obviously it's not talking about something at the time of Kedushin. Like he could say, if you do 20 push-ups, you're Mekudeshes to me. So if she does 20 push-ups, it's Mikudeshes. Obviously, she couldn't have done the push-ups before the Kedushin. She didn't know about the condition. So there's some things that have to be after some time elapses, and then they do something to fulfill. But when he's asking that I'm being Mikudeshes, that you don't have any blemishes, or that you don't have any mumim, he means at this moment. So even if she had she had made vows, but the Chacham is able to be Mater Neder, then it's considered if she didn't, because it works retroactively, that she never made the vow, so she's considered not having a vow. So there, at the time of the Kedushin, therefore Kedushin is okay. But if she goes to the doctor and the doctor heals her mum, at the time of the Kedushin, she had a mum, and the husband wasn't Mikudeshes her at that moment when she had a mum, because he didn't want it with the mum, and that's what he said. So that's the difference between blemish and vow. We saw this part of the Gemara last week, I'm pretty sure. Hatanya, but we have a different brisa. There's a brisa that says whether she went to a chacham and it was mater neder, or whether she went to a doctor and got healed. In both cases, she's not mekudeshes. So why does that brisa say that even in the case of a vow, she's not mekudeshes? Amarava lo kasha ha Rabbi Meir ha Rabbi Elazar. It's a machlokas tanaim, and one brisa is in accordance with Rabbi Meir, and one brisa is in accordance with Rabbi Lazar. So ha Rabbi Meir, this one is Rabbi Meir to Amar Adam Rosa Shetzis Vaza Ishto Bevestin. Rabbi Meir doesn't mind, holds that a person is not so particular if his wife has to go to Beistin. Now, in Israel, I was at the Beistin in Tel Aviv once to watch a dayan there, right? And the Beistin, the whole building there is a very a lot of things going on, a lot of people, this and that. It's not a calm place, because there's a lot of dayanim. They all have rooms going on with Gittin. I don't know. They probably have Dinei Torah cases going on also, and then also people when their parents die or whatever, and they have a will, everything officially has to go through there. So there's one part, and they say, okay, now go to one of these rooms and get the rabbi to sign off on it. And they don't realize that there's other proceedings going on in the room. So people come in and ask for a signature, and they don't realize that there's a get going on in there. Plus, it's the whole thing's a bureaucracy. And in Israel, you're there for the whole day. So let's say at the CRC, when we write a get, we have one get at a time. So the whole thing's about an hour and a half from beginning to end. And there's only one party, two parties for the same thing in the building at the time. And here, the Beistin that I was in, there were 4 Gittin that day. So at the beginning, in the morning we have the first couple come in. We figure out their names. And then they have the husband give the instructions to the sofer and the Adim, and then that's good. Then they go out into the hall. We bring the second one in. We do the same thing with them, and we figure out how to write their names in the Gittin, and they say their name, and then the husband tells the same thing, tells the sofer to write the get and the Adam to witness it and all that stuff. So we do that 4 times. Then the sofer writes the 4 gittin, and then towards the end of the day, with the all 4 gittin are in. Then we do the same process again. We bring them in, and the husband gives it to the wife. So there's all these people in the Beis Din for that, and then there's people coming in and out to have their inheritance stuff signed, and this and that. So it's very very buzzing there. So to say something like that they don't want their wife to have to go to somewhere like that, I completely understand that that. I'm not saying that when it's a calmer place when there's only one person at a time. I understand that too. He doesn't want his wife to have to go into the proceedings of the Beis Din and explain the situation. So there, but I'm just saying in the way that I personally saw with my own eyes, it's very, very, very it's not, I wouldn't say chaotic, but there's just a lot going on in the Rabbanut Beis Din building.
It's in Tel Aviv.
I was in Tel Aviv, yeah.
There are not so many people that you go to.
No, but anyone who wanted to get divorced has to be religious, so they have to go to the Beis Din. They may have been separated for 20 years, but now they're finally getting their get. Well, one of the people there.
Right, so in Israel, they have to have get, but for civil.
They did.
Some
I don't
people
remember.
don't
There was a
get
big
it.
thing within the like 5 years ago about changing it and allowing some type of civil marriage. So, but the law was, and this dated back to the Ottoman times, is that the religious or group was in charge of all the weddings. So any wedding or any divorce had to be done through the Beis Din. So some people would go to Cyprus, whatever, to get married there.
That's what the non-religious do now.
Right.
What do they do?
They go to Cyprus, meaning if you get married somewhere else, they'll recognize the marriage. So then during COVID, someone like did like a Zoom marriage with like a Reform rabbi. But the Reform rabbi they held it doesn't work at all. It's better to go to a justice of the peace than to go to a Reform rabbi. So they were trying to sue whatever people who wanted Israel to have civil things. They sued and they said, look, you whatever. So it became a big mess. But yeah, but in Israel, I don't think that law ever got changed. But something happened, something big happened about 5 years ago. People were trying to change it, but right. So even completely not religious people, if they wanted to get divorced, it had to be through the Beis Din.
Right, because they want a Zohar, that group wanted
Zohar, yeah.
to do something, and the rabbinate wouldn't even let them,
Yeah, Rabbi David Stab and the other people, yeah. But they were able to make some things for kashrus, because the kashrus also was all through the Rabbanut, so they made,
because it's already, there's so many people doing kashrus, exactly.
right.
Yeah.
So Rava says lo kasher haber meir haber lazar haber meir damer edam rotza shidvaza isha beis din. So since a man doesn't want his wife to have to go through Beis Din, so if she has a vow, even if it could get annulled, the kedushin does not take place. Excuse me, Rabbi Meir holds a person is okay with his wife going to the Beis Din. Therefore, that was the first brisa that we just said. So if she got the vow annulled, then it's considered as if she never made the vow. So at the time of the kedushin, she didn't have any vows on her, so they are married. Har Rebbe Lazar, the second brisa that said both in the case of a mum and she went to the doctor, or a neder and she went to the chacham, she's not mikudeshes. That's Rebbe Lazar, who holds ein adam rotza shetisvaza ishta beveis din. A person does not want that his wife has to go through the indignity of going to the Beis Din. So Maihi. So where is the source of this machlokas that Rabbi Meir and Rebbe Lazar argue about this point? Maihi Ditnan, because we have a Mishnah in the middle of Gittin. Hamotzi asishto mishum neder lo yachzer. If a person divorced his wife because of a vow, he cannot remarry her, even if I guess the vow got annulled. Mishum shemra. If he said that if he divorced her because of a bad name. Now, in this case, so what is this thing about neder? There's two. Maybe we did this last week. There's two. There's a long Rashi. There's two opinions to go to the Gemara. The second Gemara is that we don't want women to start making frivolous nedarim, and the other reason is or I don't fully understand the other case. So Mishum Shemra. So this doesn't literally mean Motzi Shemra, but he thinks that she's been committing adultery, but there's no proof. Lo Yachzer, he can't take her back.
It's called verification.
That's what the art scroll translates it. But it means he thinks that she is committing adultery, but he doesn't have proof. So it's if he divorced her because he thinks that she's not, and then she marries her later, it's almost going to be like a green light and allow her and perhaps other people to not act in a good tznius, fidelity with fidelity. So they can't take her back. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kol neder sheyedu barabim. If it was a vow that was known in public, lo yachzer, he can't remarry her. But lo yadu barabim, if it wasn't a publicly known vow or oath, yachzer, he is allowed to take her back. So we're gonna say what it means public. We'll say in a minute what that means. Rabbi Meir Omer, that was Rabbi Huda's opinion. Rabbi Meir Omer kol neder shetzarach akiras chacham lo yachzer. If it's a vow that Chacham needs to investigate it to see if he can nullify it, lo yachzer, then he can't remarry her. V'she'eno tzarich akiras chacham yachzer. And if it's a vow that doesn't need an investigation of a Chacham to get it nulled, then he is allowed to remarry her. So meaning both from Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, it depends on, there's certain types of vows that it's okay if she took the vow, even though you didn't want her to take a vow, but she took the vow, and then you could remarry her. But there are some, what the parameters are, it's a machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, but there's some vows that they say is too it's too strong, or whatever the vow was a certain type of vow that certain types of vow you can't remarry her if you divorce her because she had made vows in the first place. Rabbi Lazar says, whether the vow needs the chacham to investigate it or even not, you can't, and you divorce her because of vow, you're not allowed to later remarry her. Excuse me, Rabbi Lazar. So it's not this one clause. It's not clear that was. It's in parentheses that it's not clear that was in the Mishnah. They prohibited the case where you needed to investigate with a chacham because of the case where you do not need the chacham to investigate it. Chacham. Oh, so if it was okay, so what's the difference here between if it needs chakiras chacham or not? If it's under the category of lanos nafesh, then the husband is allowed to annul it himself as soon as he finds out about it. And if it's not one of those type of things, then you need the chacham to investigate it. So Rabbi Lezer says this because he held that a husband does not want that his wife would have to go to Beis Din. My time at Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason Rabbi Yehuda that if public knows about the vow, then you can't and he divorces her for it, he can't take her back. You can see because the pasuk says as you go to Ayin Hamid Aleph, v'lo hikum b'nei Yisrael kinish b'lahem nesio eida. So this is a case where the Givonim were causing problems, but the Bnei Yisrael didn't kill them because Yehoshua, or the leaders, which was Yehoshua had made a treaty with them, or they promised, made a shvua not to harm them. So we see because they publicly said that we weren't going to harm the Givonim, they couldn't change that. The Kamarabim, so how much is public? So, well, what would we think? Public might be a minion, right? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Shlosha. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says if it's known by 3 people, it's public because Yamim Shnaim Rabim Shlosha. There's a drasha. This I think it's about Zav actually, but the pasuk says Yamim Rabim, many days. So Yamim is plural. So if days is plural means 2, because whenever we have a plural, we have the smallest number that's possible to be included in the plural, and then Rabim, many, is adding 1 more day, so 3 days. So if it would be done in front of, was made in front of 3 people, it's considered public, and so if he divorced her because she made a vow that people know about, he cannot remarry her. That's what this from the Brisa that we quoted, or the mission we quoted. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, but Rabbi Yitzchak says Asara Eida Ksiv Behu. It's 10 because it talked about Ada, and that is like by the Meraglim that so when something happened publicly, it was an Ada, and we learned from the evil Meraglim that that's 10 people. Okay. So it happened to be. It's just I don't know if it's a little bit interesting. We have Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and then we have Rabbi Yitzchak. Was he arguing on his father, or just a different Rabbi Yitzchak? Probably was a different Rabbi Yitzchak, but it happens to be that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. I don't think it would have put, if it was a machlok between the father and the son, I don't think it would have put the son's name first. Rabbi Meir Omer, Kol neder shetzarich l'kiras chacham lo yachzir. So Rabbi Meir's opinion is, if it's a vow that doesn't need the investigation of a chacham for it to be annulled, then he's not able to remarry her after he divorced her because of the vow. Rabbi Lazar Omer, lo aser tzarach al mipnei she'eno tzara. So we were just quoting the line that we just quoted a few lines up. Rabbi Lazar says they only forbade the case where you need chakiras chacham because of the case where you do not require the chacham. So b'may kamiflagi, what's the point of the machlokas of contention between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Lazar? Rabbi Meir savar adam rotza shetizbaza ishta beveisdin. Rabbi Meir holds that a person is okay if his wife has to be embarrassed a little bit by going to Beis Din to have the chacham annulled. Rabbi Elazar savar ein adam rotza shetizbaza ishta beveisdin. A person does not want that his wife would be embarrassed by having to go to Beis Din, so therefore, even if something could be annulled, it's a problem. So I mean, it seems that we already explained that this was the point between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Lazar already. It's still at the bottom of Ayin Dal Amud Beis, but here the Gemara finally says it explicitly, and so that we finished explaining the conflicts between those 2 brises from the top of Ayin Dal Amud Beis. Rava has a different answer to explain the 2 brises. Remember, the first brisa says if it was the vow got annulled, then the kedushin takes effect, because again, remember, he was mekadesh her on kedushin that she didn't have a vow, and she had a vow, he didn't know about it, but she went to a chacham and got it annulled. So then they are mikudeshes. That's what the first brisa says. And if she had a mum and you went to the doctor and the doctor fixed the mum, they're not mikudeshes. The second brisa says both in the case of vow and she went to a chacham and got it annulled, or whether she had a mum and she went to the doctor and he fixed it. In both cases, ein mikudeshes. So the first answer that we had was the first brisa was according to Rabbi Meir. The second brisa was according to Rabbi Lazar. That was the first answer to explain the conflict between the 2 brises. Now we have a second way of explaining the brises. Rava Amar Hacha B'isha Chashuva Skinan. We're talking about an important woman. The Amar Lo Nichali De Itaser B'Krovoseha. So she's from a prominent family, So the husband says, if I can't marry her, maybe I can marry one of her sisters or one of her close relatives. And if this kedushin would have taken effect, I wouldn't be allowed to marry some of her relatives because now they'd be forbidden to me because of different incestuous arayos.
You want to apply Kedushin with sister to somebody else?
No. So he wanted to marry her, but he made the condition you don't have a vow. It ended up she had a vow, but he didn't know about it. So the question is she, are they married or not, because she did go to the chacham. So Rabbi says it's a case where the woman is from a prominent family. So meaning if the condition takes effect, they get married. If they would get divorced, now he would be forbidden to marry her sisters or a stepdaughter or a stepmother or these other arayos. But if she's someone from a prominent family, he says, okay, even if I can't marry her, I want to marry into that prominent family. So therefore, he would rather not do anything that would harm his chances to marry into that family, because it's a hush of a family.
If he married her and divorced, he cannot marry
No,
anyone.
so right.
Isn't the halacha?
Yeah. So once you are married to a certain woman, you're forbidden to a certain circle of relatives that are close to her,
Even if he divorced.
even if you divorce. Yeah. The main exception to that is her sister. If you are married to a woman and she dies, you're allowed to marry her sister, and that happened even up until 80, 90, 100 years ago in Europe. If a man was married to a woman and let's say she died in childbirth or something else, which happened a lot, and she had a younger sister, a lot of times uh, uh, he would marry the sister. Not always, but it happened a lot. I mean, I think it even happened, it recently, some more prominent Hasidic type people, and I mean, and they're old already, but their wife dies, and they want to be married. So if she has a sister, they saw, and she's a widow or whatever, the widower might marry the widow who was his wife's sister. But once your wife dies, you're allowed to marry her sister. But for a divorce, you'd never be allowed to marry her. So if it's a prominent family, it would be better from the man's perspective that the kedusha never takes effect, because if it would take effect, he's no other chance to marry into the family. So he would rather the kedushin be the best way for him. That if it's able to work on this woman, great. If it's not so. But there's a reason. We can't just say if it's not so good, but if it's not so good because there's a halachic reason because of this condition that he put in, he'd rather the kedushin not take effect so that he could marry one of her. So it never took effect. It's not going to. If you gave her the kedushin and the condition didn't get fulfilled, they were considered never married. So if they were never married, he'd be allowed to marry her sister then. So it's not a case of they were married and got divorced. Because if married divorced, then he couldn't marry her sister anymore. So we're talking about a case. He made a condition. He didn't just say, I'm marrying you, and then something was bad, so we're going to say it never happened. That doesn't work. He made a condition. So the condition was that you don't have any vows. And it ended up that she had made vows and he didn't know about it. So even if she would went to the chacham and the chacham would do hataras nedarim, and so now it's considered retroactively she didn't have any vows. But according to Rava, that brisa holds that when it's a prominent family, he'd rather have no doubts about it, that he'd not lose any chance to marry into that family. So if she had a vow, so the marriage never took place. It's considered still that they did that the marriage never took place at all. So he can marry her sister if he wants, or if I guess, well, that would come into the brisa that the Mishnah that we just saw. If she was mater neder, well, no, it probably wouldn't work. The question is if he would be mekadesh her again with the same condition. But now at the time that he made the vow, it was already annulled before he ever made the kedusha. But then it goes into the second question. If so the Mishnah in Gittin there says if you divorced her because she made a vow and that you can't remarry her later, would that halacha affect a case like this? So he can't marry her, but maybe he'd marry her sister. So and then the first brisa that says that it is a kedushin is when it's a regular family. So if he can't marry into this family, there's a lot of other families that are similar stature, so he'll just marry into a different family. What? Shidduch crisis. Right. Right. So the Gemara doesn't like this answer. But the end of the second brisa, which we didn't read the whole brisa, we didn't quote the whole brisa before. The last part of the brisa says as follows: but if he had made the vow that he didn't have any vows, and he did have a vow, and then he went to the chacham, and the chacham was matter his neder, or eitzel rove v'ripeo. So he made the vow, I'm being mikudesh to you that I don't have any blemishes, and he did have a blemish. So then after the kedushin, he went to the doctor and got it healed. Mikudeshes, she is mikudeshes. Lisni ena mikudeshes. Let the brisa say in that case that she's not mikudeshes, because we should say that it's talking about a case where he's in a prominent family, and she wants the kedushin to take place unambiguously, because she wants to marry into a prominent family also. Meaning the first case of the brisa, the one we quoted, is if he made a vow, he was mekadesh her on condition that she didn't have a vow. And the second case of the brisa, which we didn't quote until right now, is if he was the one who he made the condition that neither of us have vows, or that I don't have a vow, and he really did, it says mikudeshes. Why don't we explain the second half of the brisa the same way and say, oh, he's from a prominent family, and she would rather still marry into a prominent family, the same way we explained the first half of the brisa. So the Gemara says, "Ihi b'chodu nichale." No, it's so men are more particular to want to marry into a prominent family than a woman. Reish Lakish, because of a statement that Reish Lakish says, the Amar Reish Lakish, Reish Lakish says, we have this at the beginning of Kedushin. Tav l'meisam tandu melmesav armelu. She'd rather be married to someone as long as she's married to someone rather than be single. So basically, according to this, what Reish Lakish says, women are less picky than the men in regard to who they want to marry. They would, actually about 10 years ago, I think the Nobel in economics was one of the winners. I forgot if it was the same year that the guy who talked about kidney, Al Roth, and I think Lloyd Shapley went together. So Shapley wrote a very interesting paper in the 60s called The Stability of Marriage Problem. And basically saying everyone who's married is happy, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be married to this person. They would have waited for someone else. That's the super duper Cliff Notes version of the thing. So according to Reish Lakish, the stability of marriage problem is different on the female side than from the male side. And I don't know if maybe they're going to censor the paper because he didn't talk about same-sex marriages. So maybe it's a good thing they gave him the Nobel like 10 or 12 years ago. Nowadays they couldn't give it to him because he didn't mention the 43 different categories of the spouses. I don't know, but
I think it was like 2015 years.
So Amar Abaye. So now we have a few different statements that are similar, that the women aren't as picky as who they marry. So meaning, even though right now she could be married to a prominent family, but she's not going to hold out to marry a prominent family. If she gets someone from a good enough family, that's good enough for her. She doesn't dafka want the important family. But a man is more picky, and he'll hold out and wait till he gets more of what he's looking for. Abayamer deshum shemana gavra. If a wife whose husband is short like a bug, kurse bechara charasa ramila, she still puts her chair with. So bar charasa is like becharasa is like what we call bar chorin, except it's for the female, with the free women, meaning with the other women. even if her husband is super short, she's married, so she could go be with the married women, hang out with the married women. Papa says, so even though her husband, it's not literally as tall as an ant, but extremely short, so it wasn't the best catch. You guys, when they take a picture together, because she's a foot taller than him, but she's still married, so she's happy to be married. Papa Amar Denafse Gavra, if a woman whose husband combs wool, which is not such a great profession, because Rashi says it's disgusting. So maybe it was smelly or something. I mean, there's something else about, like, the Gemara doesn't talk about it here, but in regard to, like, being a tanner, they had to use all types of chemicals to cure or to change the hide of the animal into wool, so it smelled, and it would get stained on their skins from the chemicals and stuff they had to use. But so even if her husband comes wool, tiakre b'seife bava b'tesav, she'll call him by the gate and sit with him. Meaning, the way I understand this Gemara, it's like if they have a porch, she'll still sit with him on the porch in public for everyone to see that she's married to him, even though whether he smells bad or whether I don't know exactly what the thing about this spinning the wool that was so combing the wool was so bad, but there's something that it's not too pleasant. Rav Ashi Amar Dekose Gavre. Rav Ashi says that if a person has his yichus is questionable, lo boy talfache lekidra, she won't even ask for him for lentils to the pot, even though it's very cheap to buy lentils, and she wouldn't even ask him for him, but she's happy to be married to him. And Tana, and this is pretty strange, it was taught in the Brayos of Akulim Nezanos Vatos with a land. All these women commit adultery, but they say that the kids that they have are from their husbands. Very strange line over there. So from Rashi, it seems that even though their husbands aren't so great, the fact that they commit adultery under them, that makes it okay. There's because they're not, even though they're obviously doing a big avera, but that allows them to be happily married, in air quotes, to those husbands. Okay, we're on the first wide line in the Gemara, 75.82 in the second column. Kol mumen sheposim. The mumen that are apostle for a kohen would be apostle for a woman. If a man would say, "You're mekadesh to me that you don't have blemishes," so if it's a blemish that would disqualify a kohen from doing the avoda, it would be a problem for the woman to have. Tana, we learned in the Brayso, hosifu alehem. They added on certain things that's okay if a kohen has them, they can still do the avoda, but it's not okay for a woman. Zaya, sweat, shuma, amol, and reach hapet, bad breath. So the Gemara asks, "V'hani bekani lo pasli." Are you saying that the sweat and this mole, we're going to talk, it's a mole on the face in a prominent place, or the bad breath does not disqualify a kohen for avoda? But now we have a brisa that says that these things would disqualify a kohen. So brisa we're about to quote is actually about a bechor. For it's a mission of Bechoros that certain animals have certain things that can't be brought as a korban, and there's certain similarities between those blemishes and the blemishes of a kohen. So right now we're actually talking about an animal. We learned in the Brayso, some women elu, these blemishes that you can't bring the animal as a korban if it has these blemishes. Benkvun bein over. It doesn't matter if it's a permanent blemish or it's a temporary. Over means it's going to pass, meaning right now it has a problem, but it's going to heal up. Psulim ba'adam. These are also make a person pasul, meaning if he's a kohen, he cannot do the avoda with these blemishes. And one of the blemishes, if the animal smells very bad. So, I skipped a line. Let me try that again. V'hani b'kani lo pasli. These, the bad breath and the mole and the sweat isn't going to pasul for a kohen. Excuse me. but we learned in a Mishnah, hazakin, I forgot these three words, hazakin v'hacholav hamazuam, an old animal, a sick animal, or a stinky animal. Utnan, and we learned in another Mishnah, mumen elu bein korn bein ovrim, whether it's a permanent or even a temporary, psulin ba'adam, they also disqualify a Kohen. So it's not just about an animal. So Rashi says that we're assuming that the sweat and the bad breath would be included in mizuham, the stinky animal, the very smelly animal. So Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina lo kasha. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina says it's not a kasha. Kan b'zeas overes, kan b'zeas shein overes. It depends. When it's sweat that you take a shower, well, or whatever, and the sweat smell will go away, then that's not a blemish for a Kohen, but it is a problem for marriage. But kan b'zeas shein overes. But when it's a sweat smell that you can never get away, that's a problem for a Kohen. So meaning the Gemara is answering that there's two types of sweat. And for a regular Kohen, if it's a sweat that will go, that's a temporary sweat and you could get rid of it, that's not a problem for a Kohen. But the Chachamim said for such a case in an Isha, that would be a that would be a blemish for a woman as a wife. So that was Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina's answer. Rabbi Ashi gives another answer. Rabbi Ashi Amar Zeya Azumam Karamis. Are you asking a question on sweat based on Zuham, what I said, the stinky animal? Hasam Gabi Kohanim Efshir Laber B'Kiyur Dechamra. So there's two different. So yeah, the animal is stinky and sweat smells bad, but they're completely different level. The animal smell is much worse than any sweat. Hasam Gabi Kohanim Efshir Laber B'Kiyur Dechamra. When it's talking about the Kohen, they can make some kind of thing either with something that's a mixture that has some wine in it or it has some vinegar in it, and basically, I guess because they didn't have what's it called, Old Spice in those days, you would put this mixture of stuff, and then, or I guess, I mean, if you think about it, if you put vinegar on yourself, that smells stronger than the sweat, so it would mask the smell of the sweat. The lahavdil, I don't know if people still, I don't know, I haven't Bengay for the arthritis. It used to have a strong smell. I don't know if it still does. So if you had one smell, but then you put the Bengay on, people would smell the Bengay and wouldn't smell the sweat. So by a Kohen, there's certain things that you could put on. Nowadays we have these body sprays, but in those days it was the B'Kiyur Dechamra, and then it would cover up the sweaty smell of the Kohen. And if he had bad breath, he could put some peppers in his mouth and do the avoda. Now, I thought that this would mean pepper, like black peppercorns. That's something pretty small. But Rashi says a woman wouldn't be able to do this because he wanted to talk to her at any minute. If she had the things in her mouth, she wouldn't be able to talk. So if it's small peppercorns, I would think that you put one up on your gums or whatever, and you could still have perfectly fine conversations. From Rashi, it seems that it's something a little bigger, and we won't really have a conversation because we have stuff in your mouth. But there is actually an opinion of there's a Havamina in the third parak of Sukkah, where it says Prietz Hadar, the fruit of a beautiful tree. So the Mesorah is it's esrog, but they're trying to bring other reasons that it would be an esrog. And one of the Amoram, I forgot who, suggests maybe it's a pepper. Not the green pepper like we have, but I think it was one of these. So I don't know if our peppercorns are smaller than they used to be, if we have like a small and super concentrated, or it seems that they used to be bigger, because let's say there's machlokas over there, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, the minimum size of an esrog. One of them says it's the size of a egos, a walnut. The other says the size of a beitza. Now, obviously, an egg is much bigger than a walnut, but if you'd have big peppercorns that are closer in size to a walnut, I guess you could think that you know, but for us, if for us to take a peppercorn, how would you take a peppercorn as an esrog? Not one person could ever see you holding the peppercorn. You couldn't see it yourself because it's so small, holding in your fingers. So they must have had bigger peppercorns in those days that were closer to the size of a walnut. That's I don't know. That's what I guess you'd have to explain it. But by a woman, it's not possible to keep a pepper in her mouth all the time. So so that would be a problem if she has bad breath. Now, I mentioned a couple months ago about Rav Ovadia Yosef that there's a halacha that a pregnant woman can't get married, even if there's no question. We know that who the father is, but there's other problems, and so Rav Ovadia Yosef says nowadays that we have a baby formula, meaning one of the problem is if she would get pregnant again, she would lose her milk supply for the baby, and we'd want to wait till we learned about 18 months or 2 years that the baby should nurse from the mother. So we don't want to get her to get pregnant again quickly, because then how will the baby eat? Because this is clearly a different husband, but the new husband wants to have a baby, so he would be in a rush to get her pregnant. So we mentioned that about 15 years ago, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef made a psak that nowadays there's plenty of baby formula. She can get married, and we're not worried that the baby is going to lose, the first baby that gets born is going to lose the milk supply for the mother, because it's not going to starve. You don't have to hire a wet nurse. There's so much formula, and so many people use formula. It's not a problem with formula. So as far as I know, he didn't give something about this, but if we would say that because nowadays we have deodorants and we have Listerine and Scope that kill the germs that cause the bad breath. So it's not just having the peppercorns in your mouth, but it might last longer. I'm not on a level to make a psak like that, to say that the facts nowadays are so significantly different. The halacha wouldn't be in. We don't have the paskin like that anymore. Not because we changed halacha chas v'shalom, but because we have very common, cheap and readily available remedies that would render the perspiration part moot or easily cause the bad breath. But I could potentially see that a great posek could make a rule like that. I could also see people who think they're great poskim who aren't, to want to change the halacha, make the thing, but without that determination. What's the case of the mole that for a Kohen would be okay, but for a woman would not be okay? That it's not considered a blemish for a Kohen, but it would be considered a blemish for a wife. If it's a mole that has hair in it, it's even possible for a Kohen. If there's no hair in it, if it's big enough, even if there's no hair growing on it, it's also a blemish for a Kohen, and a Kohen couldn't do the avoda if he had such a blemish like that. And if it's small, it's not a problem for a woman, and it's not a problem for a Kohen either. So we're looking for a specific type of mole that would be okay for a Kohen and not okay for a wife. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, Shuma sheish bosar, if a mole has a hair in it, harei mum, it's a blemish for a Kohen. Ein baseir, if it doesn't have hair in it, gedola harei mum, if it's a big one, it's considered a blemish. Gitana ein mum, if it's a small mole, it's not a mum. Ve'ezo hi gedola, and what is the size of a big one? Pirush Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel ad ki isar italki. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says if it's up to the size of the Italian isser, which was a certain coin, a certain silver coin. So if it was that size, then it's considered big. So we see that even for a Kohen, most of these moles are a mum. So what would be a mole that's not a mum for a Kohen but is a mum for a woman? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, when it's on her forehead. But Padachta Rav and Ispayisu, if it's on her forehead, he saw it and he gave her kedushin anyway. Meaning, if the mole's on her forehead, he saw her forehead before he gave her the ring, right? So the Gemara says, Amra Papa, Bamedas Otachas Kipa Shel Rosha. It's under the hat on her head. So sometimes it's visible and sometimes it's not. So even though it's on her forehead, we're not so sure that he saw it. But if it, let's say, on her cheek, it would definitely be visible. Now, I don't know about this cap over here, but according to what we said a few weeks ago about the difference about difference between the Rambam and the Sephardic Rishonim and the Rosh and the Ashkenazic Rishonim in regard to hair of a woman being an erva, and we said that the Rambam and the Sephardic opinion seem to hold that this was about going without the hair fully covered. If she had the basket on her head, you couldn't see her hair, but it wasn't fully covered. So according to the Rambam, you need a higher level of covering, and we said that even the unmarried women in the countries where the Rambam lived, they also went outside with their hair covered, whereas in the Germany where the Bali Tosfos and the Rush, those unmarried women presumably went out in the street with their hair uncovered. This seems to be with the fact that there's some type of cap that they're wearing. It happens to lean more towards the Rambam, but it's not exactly like the Rambam either because of this cap, this kippah. Kippah. Kippah is also the Hebrew word for a dome on a building. So, Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda gave another example of a mum Haim Milsa Migav Rabbi Shemiele. I heard this from a great man, Umanu Reb Shela. Who was this Reb Shela? Neshacha Kelvanasa Mikamot Selekas. If she was bitten by a dog and she has some type of scar, Harei Zamum, that's a blemish for a wife. Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, Kol Ava Be'isha Harei Zamum. A deep voice in a woman is a vow. Shenemar Ki Kolech Arev Umarech Nave. Because in regard to woman in Shir Hashirim, you have a pleasant voice and a pleasant appearance. So if the voice was too deep, that sounded more like a man, that would be a problem. Okay, so it's 8:01. We have to stop here, 8 o'clock. So we're almost at the Mishnah. So Emir